Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 114, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. In the last couple issues, Swamp Thing has been entered into the gubernatorial race for governor in Louisiana. But this story actually takes a turn from that storyline, and it actually ties in with issue 111, which is called Zydeco Yaya. And in that issue, a man who plays the accordion appeared before Swamp Thing, Abby, and Tefe while they were walking through the swamp, and he told them a bunch of different ghost stories that seemed to kind of all lay seeds for future storylines in this Nancy Collins run. And one of those stories was about a pirate named Dark Conrad who sailed the seven seas back in the day. And there was a good pirate that he fought named Jean Lafitte. And it was basically a story about how Dark Conrad killed Lafitte's wife. And Jean Lafitte promised that he would get revenge for his wife in this life or the next. And then at the end of that, the old man that was telling the story gave Swamp Thing a doubloon from Lafitte's treasure and said that a storm was coming, and if you ever saw Dark Conrad, that you should take that doubloon and call for Lafitte's help. And then the old man turned into a ghost, and we didn't really hear any more about that, but this issue follows up with that storyline. So first things first, with issue 114, we have the cover here. We see a pirate flag with a red skull and crossbones on it. In fact, the whole background is red behind the flag on this as well. And it seems to be kind of underwater, or it looks kind of like it has a wave to it. And there might be like light rays reflecting on it. And the disembodied head of Swamp Thing is sitting on the ground next to this flag, along with a bunch of doubloons strewn around it. And we actually see Swamp Thing's head kind of has like tentacles, almost like the Davy Jones character from Pirates of the Caribbean 2, Dead Man's Chest. And we see that this is written by Nancy A. Collins with art by Tom Mandrake and Kim DeMolder. And we start off in the Louisiana bayou, where a man named Avril Glapion is fishing for some crawdads. And if you don't know how that's done, the man is putting down baskets, kind of like for crabs, and these little crawdads, or prawns, I think some people call them, get stuck in the basket, and he pulls them up. So he's got a bunch of these little buoys that are floating that have numbers on them, and that lets him set them and then come back and find them later. So as he's doing this, we get some narration that says, Avril Glapion probes the muddy bottom of the shallows, judging the drag and pull of the bayou's currents. He has been crawdadding since he was big enough to pull traps from the water, just like his pawpaw and his grandpère before him. Those outside of the closed community of the Cajuns are baffled why the dispossessed Arcadians resettled in the heart of a vast swamp. But where outsiders only see muck and mud and dangerous animals, Avril Glapion sees a world of unparalleled loveliness, generous to those familiar with its secrets. Surely God must have green eyes. So as Avril goes through the swamp, we see a bunch of different pretty panels of all the beautiful wildlife that's in the swamp. And it seems that Avril is kind of appreciating all of this and taking it in as he's going through. And the narration continues. There's egrets white as a bridal's veil, Spanish moss, the texture of rotten lace. These wonders are the Cajun's birthright. But this is far from the sterile, tame nature of a man-made garden. There is danger here, camouflaged by beauty. A rotting log is really a gator. A trailing vine turns out to be a snake with venom twice as deadly as that of a cobra. A lump of mud and dead leaves reveals itself as a snapping turtle big enough to amputate a man's foot in one bite. While Avril Glapion respects these creatures and is wary of them, he does not fear them. The swamp is both awesome and terrible, unrelenting in its scale. To have beauty, there must be ugliness, and who is to say where one ends and the other begins? Surely not Avril Glapion. And as we turn the page, we see Avril approaching another one of his buoys, and as he reaches over to grab it, all of a sudden a tentacle comes out and grabs him. And he yells out, Que diable! Mother of God, help me! Help me! And as he says that last help me, the tentacles pull him in the water and drag down his boat and his prawns, and all that's left of Avril is his hat, which flew off as he was being attacked and got snagged on a tree branch. And then we cut to London, England, where we see John Constantine, and he seems to be having nightmares and is sweating and fretting about, and all of a sudden he wakes up and we see His right eye that's open has a torn up black pirate flag with the skull and crossbones directly over his right eye. And this is probably symbolizing what he was dreaming about. And he yells out, "Bugger me." And we see the name of this issue is Pirate's Alley. And then we cut to the swamp once again, but now we're at Swamp Thing's homestead, and we see Abby and Tefe playing on the grass in the front lawn, and their good old Cajun friend LeBeau is rowing up on one of his boats, and he's saying hi to Abby. And he's not here for just a social call. It turns out Abby has asked him if he knew anyone who could make some jewelry, and apparently he had a friend who was able to, so he's delivering that piece of jewelry to her right now. And when he pulls it out, we see that what it is actually the doubloon that the ghostly accordion or Zydeco player gave Swamp Thing at the end of issue 111. And apparently her request was that LeBeau's friend put it on a necklace. So she now has this doubloon around her neck. And LeBeau says, "My friend asked me if you had more doubloons like this. If so, he's interested in buying them." And as Abby admires it, she says, "I'm afraid this is the only one. Alec found it somewhere in the swamp." And just as she says that, Swamp Thing begins to grow a body next to her so he can say hi to LeBeau as well. And he says, "Good afternoon, LeBeau. What brings you out this way?" And Abby holds out the necklace from her neck, and she says, "He was just bringing me my new necklace, the one I had made from the antique doubloon you found." And as Swamp Thing looks at it, he has a nice smile on his face, and he says, "I see." And then Abby asks, "LeBeau's friend, the one who made this for me, wants to know if there might be any more coins like this. I told LeBeau I doubted it, but you'd know for sure." And then Swamp Thing kind of has like a flashback to the old ghostly man handing him a coin, and he says, "You were correct the first time. There are no more coins such as this to be found in the swamp. It is unique." And as he says this last line, he's looking at Abby deeply in her eyes, and she's looking at him in the same way, and it's just kind of like a nice panel of how much in love they are. Then we cut to a little homestead in the middle of the bayou. We've never been here before. And as we cut to the inside of this, we find out that this is just the home of a very poor and abusive family. And the members of this family are the dad, the mom, there's a little baby sister, there's a middle child that's a boy, and then there's two older kids that are like twins, and they're boys too. And they're all acting crazy at the dinner table. But the main thing going on is the dad is berating the middle boy for reading fictional books. And the fictional book that the middle boy is reading is Treasure Island. And when the dad finds this out, he already thought reading was good for nothing and a big waste of time. But the dad is extra mad that he's reading fiction books. Because as he says it, hell, it ain't even a book about stuff that's real. So the middle boy gets all sad as his dad says this, and he looks down and he says, "Pirates was real." And upon hearing that, the dad gets very angry. He says, "What was that you said, boy? Was you backsassing me?" And the dad stands up and takes off his belt. And as he's about to hit his kid, the mom jumps in between the dad and the kid and tries to protect the child. But the dad says, "Jenna, you've been keeping that youngin' under your skirt too long. It's time he learned what's what." And then out of nowhere behind them, a voice says, "I could not agree with you more, my good fella. Sparing the rod does indeed spoil the child." And the mom, who already sees who is talking because they're behind the husband, she's already scared, but the husband whips his head around as he was talking, and we get a panel of what the dad sees. And what the dad sees is a bunch of different man-sea creature hybrids who are being led by the person who was speaking, and that person looks more humanish. His skin is all dark blue, though, and he has, like, where his ears would be, like, kind of fins, and he's wearing pirate garb, and he's got a cutlass. And he also has like a Freddy Krueger hand with sharp fingers on it too. And all the other sea creature hybrids also have weapons, and most of them have like pirate-based garb on as well. So immediately upon seeing these guys, the dad yells at them and says, "What are you doing here? What do you people want? What are you doing to my house?" And the head pirate answers the man, "What do we want? Why, to bring hell to earth, that's all." And then the head pirate gives orders to his men saying, "Take the wench and the younger brats, kill the others, torch the house when you're finished." So his men listen, and we see some tentacle arms shoot out and grab the mother and the middle kid and the youngest daughter. And as they're being pulled away, the dad says, who the hell do you think you are, you crazy son of a bitch?" And before he can yell anything else, the other pirates jump on him and the kids, and we see knives and a panel that's red, so I'm assuming that means that they're stabbing them. So the husband and the two older kids that I guess were more like their dad were murdered by these pirates. And in answering to the dad's final question, the head pirate guy says, "I am Dark Conrad, and I am here to tear your world apart." And in the panel that he says this, it's more of a close-up on his face, and we see that he's actually got a really skinny forked tongue, like a snake almost, and he's got super sharpened teeth, and his eye is red, except the pupil in the middle, which is actually like black, but it's vertical, like a cat's eyes. So then we cut back to the Swamp Thing homestead, and Swamp Thing, Abby, and Tefe are sitting on their front porch on a swing, and Swamp Thing's asking if she's happy, and Abby says that she's very happy right now. But that nice comment about her happiness is interrupted by someone saying, my, aren't we just overflowing with domestic tranquility? Pardon me while I gag." And we get a zoomed out panel that shows who was speaking, and it is in fact the Hellblazer, John Constantine. And if you're new to the series, whenever John visits the Swamp family, it's never a good thing. He's always brings some kind of bad news or a scheme that he wants to involve Swamp Thing in. And Abby absolutely hates him, so she sees him and says, great, just when things were starting to settle down again. And Swamp Thing, who's looking pretty angry now, says, "What is it you want from us this time, John Constantine?" And John looks up at him and smiles and says, "It's nice to know I'm welcome. What if I said I just happened to be in the neighborhood and decided to stop by and pay an old social call on you and the missus?" And apparently Swamp Thing did not like that, because the next panel we get as we turn the page is a very angry Swamp Thing standing right in front of John, and you get to see how massive Swamp Thing is compared to John. And Swamp Thing doesn't say anything, so John just continues, "Nah, I didn't think you'd fall for that one myself. Look, Nature Boy, the only reason I'd leave my digs in London to slog around this godforsaken pest hole you call a home was if there was something wrong." And as John says this, he's like pointing his finger into Swamp Thing's chest, so John's at least putting on the airs that he is not scared by Swamp Thing. So Swamp Thing replies, "I do not care what happens elsewhere. It is no concern of mine." And then John replies, "Well, aren't we being quick to decide? You're losing your touch, you big green wanker. You're too busy changing nappies and boinking the missus to notice the storm brewing in your backyard." And Swamp Thing kind of looks surprised and says, "Storm? A man I met in the swamp warned of a coming storm not long ago." And John says, "It's coming all right, and it'll be bloody hard to miss when it gets here, what with it flying the Jolly Roger." Then we cut to a ghostly pirate ship pulling up to a dock, and it definitely has to be a ghostly pirate ship because ships this big generally can't pull up to a dock. And there are two men just standing on this dock looking at this pirate ship, and one of them says, "Gene, do you see what I see?" And Gene answers, "Yeah, maybe someone been making a movie hereabouts." And as they look in awe and wonder at this ship, we see at the dock's water level, something is coming out and sneaking up behind them. And this figure is in silhouette, but we can tell by the Freddy Krueger hand that this is Dark Conrad. And one of the men is immediately run through by Dark Conrad's cutlass, and the other takes off running through town yelling monsters. And I should say the town that they're running through, I believe it's Terrebonne Parish. It looks a lot like it. We've seen it before, so I'm assuming that that is the town that they're in. And following close behind the man who was running away from the docks, Dark Conrad and his hybrid sea creature monster men invade the town, and Dark Conrad is holding the head of the man that he killed on the dock, and he's saying, "It's good to be back." Then we cut back to Swamp Thing and John talking, and Swamp Thing's getting mad because he thinks John is just stringing him along again with John talking about pirates, but John says, "Look, you sodden great compost heap, it's not as simple as that. You seem to think I know what's going on behind the scenes. Well, all right, sometimes I do, but most of the time I'm just guessing. I wake up with, I don't know, call them suspicions. I know something's wrong, but I'm not sure exactly what. Give us a break, huh? It's not like I'm Dr. Fate or the Phantom Bloody Stranger or any of those toffee-nosed gits who wear their knickers wrong side out." And upon hearing this, Swamp Thing kind of softens and says, "I always assumed you were more central to the problems at hand. You always seem so mysterious." And John replies, "Yeah, well, it's an act I put on to impress the rubes. Smoke and mirror, so to say. Worked with you, didn't it?" Then Swamp Thing looks down at John and says, "You have changed, John Constantine. There is something different about you that I cannot place." And John says, "Yeah, well, having my dad chopped up into bits by a serial killer and a slight bout of terminal lung cancer did alter how I see things." And Swamp Thing, hearing all this bad news that John has just gone through, says, I'm sorry, your father." And John cuts him off saying, "Forget it. I've settled with the bastard that done him, for good or ill. And Swamp Thing asks, and the cancer? And John looks at him with a twinkle in his eye and says, yeah, that's been taken care of too. And in a way I'm sure wouldn't meet with your approval. And I'm just going to interject a little bit of self-promotion here. I am currently reading through Hellblazer as well, and we are in tandem with Swamp Thing over at Patreon. So if you want to know what John's talking about with his dad being killed by a serial killer or him beating terminal lung cancer, check out our Hellblazer tier over at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word. All right, enough about that. Let's get back to it. So I guess since Swamp Thing was being nice to John, John gets defensive and says, listen, I don't want your bleeding pity. I prefer to keep our relationship on something besides a first name basis, if that's all the same to you. And Swamp Thing's kind of taken aback by John's attitude here because he was trying to be nice, and he says, very well, Constantine. And then out of nowhere, a ghostly voice says, talk, talk, talk. That's all you live folks do. The time is past talking. It's time to do. And when John and Swamp Thing turn around to see who's talking, it is in fact the ghost of the old man who gave Swamp Thing the coin, the accordion player. And the ghost continues, we gave you fair warning, Bomb Gumbo, but you chose not to heed it. So we were forced to call the honky conjure man in. And Swamp Thing says, you said we. Who is it you represent? And the old man answers, why, the spirit of the swamp. What else? I have answered your question, now answer mine. Where is the coin I gave you? The doubloon from Jean Lafitte's treasure. And Swamp Thing looks around kind of guiltily and goes, because he was not supposed to give that to Abby as a necklace. He was supposed to keep that doubloon around to defeat Dark Conrad. Then we cut inside the house where Abby is talking to Tefe at the dinner table, and Tefe says, Mama, Tefe go bye-bye. And Abby looks at her and says, don't be silly, sweetie. You're not going anywhere. And as she says this, we get a panel of her looking very terrified, as if someone is in the house with her. And then we cut to the outside where the ghost and Swamp Thing are talking, and the ghost is saying, what do you mean you don't have it with you? And Swamp Thing looks at him and says, well, my wife. And then all of a sudden he's cut off by the screams coming from inside his house, and he turns and says, Abby. And the ghost says, he is here. And then Swamp Thing goes into the green really quick to try to move as fast as he can, because Dark Conrad and his men have captured Abby and Tefe and stolen her from the house, and now they're in the back area, taking them into the swamp. And they don't just have Abby, they have Tefe too, and Tefe is looking kind of normal. She's not like freaking out, but she says, Mama, as she's being handed off to Dark Conrad, and Abby's yelling behind her, let me go, you refugee from a cat food factory, put me down. And then Swamp Thing appears and punches one of the guys, and he says, let go of my wife. And then Swamp Thing grabs the tentacles of the octopus humanoid monster that has Abby, and he says, I said, let her go. And then he backhands the octopus, but it doesn't drop Abby. It still like has her in his tentacles. But now that she sees Swamp Thing, she says, Alec, thank God. And then Dark Conrad, who has Tefe, says, I wouldn't be so quick giving thanks if I were you, Missy. So, the elementals still walk this plane, huh? And then he looks at Swamp Thing and says, don't interfere, Wood God, or I'll turn the babe into chum right where we stand. And it'd be a waste to spill such rare blood as hers. And then a very angry Swamp Thing looks at him and says, if you dare harm so much as a hair on my daughter's head, I'll... But he's cut off by Dark Conrad, who has now gotten to a rowboat with all his men and Abby and Tefe, and he says, you'll do what, Elemental? Do not try your earth magics with me. I am servitor to forces far more ancient than growing things, older than this miserable planet's molten core. So as they row away, Abby is of course screaming to Alec, and Tefe is saying, Daddy, Tefe go bye-bye. So at least it doesn't seem to be traumatizing her too much. So as Swamp Thing's trying to follow them into the water, all of a sudden John runs up, and he's of course out of breath, and he's saying, there you are. What the hell's going on, damn it? And Swamp Thing says, he took Abby and the baby. And of course, John didn't see any of this happen, so he says, who? The meter reader? And Swamp Thing says, a demon pirate who calls himself Dark Conrad. And John kind of looks at him and says, bleeding hell, of course, now it makes sense. And Swamp Thing says, you know of this man? And then John gives us the lowdown. He gives us the whole history that he knows about the pirate named Dark Conrad. And he starts, aye, you could say that. Dark Conrad may not be as well known as Blackbeard or John Silver, but in certain occult circles, he's quite infamous. Story has it he was a minor noble, a baronet of some kind. He had an unwholesome interest in the black arts and the money to acquire rare artifacts. So the art on this page is actually like a full page spread that kind of meanders through some like thinking clouds where we get some images of what John's talking about. So the first panel, we see a like man with a white wig looking at the Necronomicon. Then we see that same man in a fancy chair watching some naked women dance around a fire, and one of those women is grinding up on his lap. And the narration continues. He belonged to a so-called occult brotherhood called the Brimstone Circle. Basically, they were a bunch of jaded wankers that couldn't get it up without a birching. They held their ritual orgies at his country estate. There was some kind of scandal. The rumors vary. Whatever it was nasty enough to get our boy stripped of his title. And then we see a scene of that man stabbing and killing one of the naked women that was dancing around him. And the narration continues. Next time anyone hears of him, he's raising bloody hell along the Spanish Main. In more ways than one, if you catch my drift. And what we're seeing here is the human form of Dark Conrad in all his pirate gear. And he's on a pirate ship fighting another pirate ship. And then we see him on the deck of that ship doing some kind of satanic ritual, showing that he's not only raising hell by just killing people with a pirate ship, he's also literally raising hell and doing something with demons. And the narration continues. Rumor has it the old bugger was in tight with some of the more eldritch and powerful entities. Some call them demons. Others say they're gods. There's no real description that fits them, truth to tell, although they're sometimes referred to as the Old Ones. Whatever the Old Ones are, if you want to stay in their good graces, you have to supply a lot of blood and souls, and Dark Conrad was more than happy to comply. It was during one of his raids that he made fellow pirate Jean Lafitte his mortal enemy. Seems Lafitte didn't take lightly to having his missus ritually tortured and raped. Dark Conrad might have been a crazy wanker, but he wasn't a fool. He knew Lafitte was determined to follow him to the very gates of hell, or a reasonable substitute. And in this panel, we get a picture of Lafitte's ship following Dark Conrad's ship, and I assume they are entering the swampy areas of Louisiana. So after John gives this big info dump, Swamp Thing says, "You seem to know a lot about this pirate wizard." And John says, "Yeah, I would, wouldn't I? After all, the bastard's last name was Constantine." And we get a big reveal there about John's family tree. Apparently, John is kin to this dark pirate wizard. Then we cut to somewhere near that town that the pirates already raided called Terrebonne Parish. And there is a woman who has a fan boat that is kind of like a tour guide for the swamps. And she rides up as she sees some smoke coming from the town. And she pulls up to the dock, and as she's tying up her boat, all of a sudden a shadow falls over her, and as she turns to see what it is, she is confronted by a bunch of sea monster pirates. So it seems that Dark Conrad has split his crew into two. Some were left in this town, and then Dark Conrad took the others to go get Tefe and Abby. And we do see that these pirates end up taking her fan boat and are riding it crazily through the swamp after they kill her. Then we cut to Abby with Dark Conrad, and she's holding Tefe in the boat, and she's saying, "You're not going to get away with whatever it is you're planning. Alec will stop you." And Dark Conrad says, "Ah, you're a fiery one. You remind me of Madame Lafitte. She was strong-willed too. Her blood was almost as sweet as her screams. Let the elemental do its worst. The old ones walked this planet when it was not but molten lava. The green and its champions are mere upstarts." And I'm not sure exactly where he's taking them, but this boat is going into some kind of like glade where there is almost like a castle or something like that. We see spires, and there's definitely a spire that goes super tall above the cloud line. Maybe it's some sort of pirate hideout from the past, because it's definitely old and it's covered in vines and looks like it's been hidden from everybody for a long time. So Dark Conrad continues, "Mankind's depletion of the green has weakened its control on the planet. The old ones have decided now it is time for them to reclaim that which was rightfully theirs." And as Abby gets out of the boat with Dark Conrad, she looks up at this ancient city and she says, "Oh my God, my dream. This was in my dream." And Dark Conrad says, "It is my destiny to be the opener of the way, to usher in the second coming of they who walked before. I shall not fail my masters, for to fail the old ones ensures extinction. Ask the dinosaurs." So apparently this town is some kind of ancient ruins where the old ones can be raised from. So as Abby walks with Dark Conrad, all of a sudden we see a bunch of the townsfolk from Terrebonne Parish, including LeBeau is there, and he sees Abby and he says, Magumbo, Abby. But before he can get very far, he gets pistol whipped by one of the guards, and Abby turns to Dark Conrad and says, "Leave him alone, you And Dark Conrad grabs her by the hair and says, "Yes, you are very like Madame Lafitte." And then he throws her by the hair across the ground and he says, "I'm sure you and she will have plenty to discuss in hell." And then Abby looks up in terror and we get the final splash page of this issue where we see Dark Conrad waving his Freddy Krueger hand and cutlass around along with a couple of his guards. And they're standing in front of some kind of vortex, or at least that's what it looks like. Maybe it's just kind of like an artistic rendering of what Abby's seeing because she's so afraid. But that is the image we are left with because that is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see y'all in the next one.